Welcome to Towers, a Metazoo podcast. I promised you 2 extra episodes, and this is the first of those. We're going to talk about getting sick at a tournament and some potential strategies, things to avoid. So, my story. Dark Tower at the Mothman Festival. I'm very excited. Got a fun spell book. I've been dying to go to Point Pleasant for years to go see where the Mothman origin story comes from. I get to visit some friends in Ohio. So everything's looking good. Packed up. I've got 3 towers behind me, so I kind of know what to expect, what to grab, what not to bring. I get on the plane. I land in Ohio, spend the night. Next day, pick up a car, pick up the team, drive 3 hours to West Virginia. Stop in Point Pleasant, because at this point it's pretty late, but we want to get, a sense for the venue and how long the drive's going to be. We were in the next town over, which was a bunch of miles down the road into the mountains. And the thing with West Virginia, especially in this region, is it's a bit of a food desert. Things close early. Towns don't have super large populations. So by the time all is said and done, it is night and just about everything is closed. And if you followed advice from previous episodes, you know that food and staying fueled is very important to survive a whole 7 or 8 round tournament. So we split up. We have a fast food chain I wasn't interested in. We have a Walmart that's about to close, and we have a Chipotle. And I say, you know what, let's just go with Chipotle. It served me well during Water Tower, during my first big tournament. And so Herman and I go in there. And we try to go with the safe option, and for me, the safe option is the steak quesadilla. I get some guacamole on the side to get those extra nutrients in to set us up for tomorrow. We kind of looked around and saw that with the festival, we didn't have a lot of great breakfast options. There were great breakfast restaurants, but by the time they opened, we got food. The festival would already be popping off, and parking would probably be difficult. So we eat this. I get mine with guac. Herman gets his without guac. Everything seems fine. Fast forward to registration the next day. We showed up early, so I had a lot of time to drink water, walk around, see some of the festival, register my spell book. But then about 20 minutes into that, I feel the color drain from my face. My whole body gets cold, and I'm worried. And before I have confirmed that, I am not well. I didn't think I had a bug. I did bring masks just in case, but something wasn't right. Right before the round started, I was on the verge of puking my guts out. I was making frequent trips to the already very busy restroom. To say I was feeling bad was an understatement. Turns out it was the guacamole. The guacamole was bad, and I had food poisoning. It's not looking good for me. I play my first round. It goes well, but I have tunnel vision. I get to my second and then third round, and by the third round, I am barely staying up in my chair. I had to warn my opponents, if I'm out of it, I am so sorry. And all I could see was the cards in my hand and the plays on the table. I actually think this served me fairly well. I played a lot of talented casters, and I think I was just really difficult to read at this stage because I was only reacting based on what I saw. There's no, evolving game plan outside of what repetition I had built in through a lot of practice. But I can't eat anything, and I can barely drink. Which means the longer this thing is going to go on, the worse shape I'm going to be. I figured eventually things would even out and I'd be able to get a little bit of food in. But by round 6 and 7, I'm barely human. If you've ever gone to a tournament and been nervous and not eaten anything while it's happening, you'll probably recognize that drain at the end. Your brain's burning a lot of calories and you got to refill those. And on top of feeling sick, I could not do that. We got to the end of the day. I was a zombie. We drove back to our hotel through the fog. We see a yellow rectangle sign. I always think they're going to be Waffle Houses, but they've all been Dollar Generals in this region. It feels like there's 3 Dollar Generals in every town. But lo and behold, there's a Waffle House. I swear this was a cryptid Waffle House. This was Valhalla, there to take care of fallen people. Because this is the nicest Waffle House I'd ever been in. I was able to eat a bunch of food and kind of recharge, and my system reset. I was still pretty wiped the next day, but that was that. But Oh, it is disappointing the level it affected my performance at this tournament. We'll talk about variance in the next episode and how the Dark Tower really wasn't my day as far as luck goes. It actually kind of worked out for my team because 3 of the 4 of us made it to day 2, and I was the sick one, and I also had the worst luck I've ever had at a tower. As unfortunate as it was, it kind of worked out. But I want to talk about, what I did that worked, what my pitfalls were, and how I'm going to prepare for the next one. So practice and knowing your spell book is so important. The only reason I was able to get through my matches is I had baked all of the moves, all of the combinations into my brain. We had run through, I don't know how many spell books to test against to see what was the best, so I was familiar with every card in the format. And after a few turns, when I saw what my opponent was doing, I could generally figure it out. Even with that red ink deck, halfway through the first round, I kind of saw and knew what it was doing, and by the second round, I was able to do what little I could to try to counter it. But wow, if I wasn't prepared, if I went there with my training level for Water Tower, I would have been full-on doomed. And that's kind of a given for any tower. You should be doing that anyways. But another thing I did that worked out is I was taking sips of water when I could, and I was tapping into a state of mind that you get from mindfulness meditation. I studied psychology in school, and we got into a lot of these kind of techniques and what they do and don't do for your brain. But being able to shut everything else out and just focus on the cards on the table. I was only running at 20% energy, but all 20% was focused on the game. Now, a pitfall, something that I noticed really affected performance, and that was not being able to play the psychological side of the game, which is so important. I straight up lost one match because I sat there and counted my aura. I was pulling nothing but aura that whole game, but I had an All Hallows Eve in hand, and I knew if I could get that thing off, it was game over in my favor. I would have taken the round. But because I sat there and I counted them, my opponent read it and played that New Year's New Beginnings, and that was game. Great play on his side. And something I'm usually pretty good at not doing. I'm a cosmic player, so you always have to be a few steps ahead. You always have to know what your resources look like so you can turn your focus on your opponent and what they're doing. But I could only pay attention to what was happening in front of me. This happened a few other times. I did what I could to not have tells, but I wasn't able to bluff. When my opponent asked me something about the board state that indicated they were going to cast something, I couldn't then hold up a card pretending I was going to Smoky Spirit, for example. I just didn't have the brain power. It was make correct plays or try to be tricky in making correct plays, and that was that. Another thing that really went to my detriment was not taking the extra second to double read cards. There was a really fun match that I played that I ended up losing in what we later found out was a quote-unquote illegal play. I had my opponent on the ropes. If I drew one of 8 different cards, I could have closed the game. But then that Bloodlust plus the power-up red meant my opponent was swinging for over 500 damage, and you get 1 lightning in a bottle and the game is over. We were so excited about it at the time. It just felt like peak Metazoo, and it's definitely a game I remember fondly. And we were telling a judge about it later, and the judge is like, you can't put Power Up Red on a Bloodlust. And we had read the first few sentences, which is you can't put it on something that already has a page. And my opponent did what he could of playing the Bloodlust and putting the Power Up Red under it. We didn't read the last sentence, you can't put another page under the Bloodlusted Beastie. Which makes sense. If I had half of my wits about me, I'd be like, that's pretty broken, and we'd be playing that card a lot. And that was kind of a theme with Bloodlust throughout the day. I won several games because my opponent played a Bloodlust, and it really worked out against them. But it taught us both something, and he went on to day 2, which I was really happy about. Because anytime you have a really great match with someone, you want them to succeed. Another thing that worked out for me is I had contingencies for Dark Tower. It helped that Mothman Festival was there, and I just very much into the cryptid stuff. And so there's some win-win situations. It wasn't a matter of utter disappointment because I traveled across the country and then didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish and having a smooth tournament day. Because I didn't make it to day 2, I was able to help my teammates secure some cards that they would not have been able to otherwise, and I was able to enjoy the festival, which would not have happened if I had made it to day 2. And that's something I see a lot of casters do with these tournaments. When they don't make it to day 2, they have other travel plans. They go see the city, they might see a concert, they go get food. And while I think you should be focused on the tournament and not what will happen before or after, if you kind of lose your edge because you know, like, this is stressful, and if I just kind of bow out of this game, I can go vacation tomorrow, it's going to hurt you. That being said, having other travel plans on top of the tower means that you're just not sitting there afterwards. You can still make good memories. But what am I going to do for the next tournament to prevent this? Something I've been meaning to do, and will definitely do now, is scouting out food options ahead of time, figuring out what their hours are, figuring out when you're going to arrive so that you can eat something safe. I'm also more likely to just go to a grocery store and pack sandwich materials, especially if the hotel has a fridge, just to be really safe. After the game's over, we can go party and eat whatever, but I know what I cook at home. I know it works for me. I really don't want to mess with that. On top of it making the tournament a struggle, it also just was not a fun experience physically. I wouldn't want to have played that day at home with no obligations, let alone in that situation. So scout your dinner options the night before, scout your breakfast and potentially lunch options the next day. My snacks did work out. I always have a big bag of peanut M&Ms and dried mangoes because they're just really easy to eat what you need between rounds without overdoing it. And by the end of the day, being able to get a small handful of M&Ms down and a mango slice did, I think, keep me alive. It kept me from completely falling over. Now, that's all prep stuff on top of, trying to make sure you get a full night's sleep, drinking a lot of water. But what happens if you do get sick? The casters were so nice to me. A lot of them came up and gave me advice, or at least there was a lot of commiserating of telling me about tournaments where they had been sick. And through that experience, I learned that it is expected that at some point you're going to get sick during a big tournament you'd been preparing for. And that's a lot of why I'm making this episode. If we're all aspiring to be the best players we can be, which means we're going to enough tournaments, you want to be prepared when the illness comes for you. So just right off the bat, I think you should do this even if you're not sick, but bring a roll of toilet paper. There's a lot of people using not a lot of bathrooms, and supplies run out quick. If you can just have that in your pack, it's going to go a long way just for the sake of comfort. On top of that, hand sanitizer is something I always pack anyways, but definitely have hand sanitizer. Be washing your hands, the days around it, just so that you can keep everything sanitary. And then getting whatever medication to stop your system that works for you. Ricky handed me a bottle of Pepto-Bismol and I chugged half of it. But I do a lot of long distance backpacking, and normally I just have Imodium pills in my first aid kit, and those work really well. On top of that, having a way to get the vitamins back into you even if you're feeling sick. So something I like to pack are little emergency packets. It's just good to get some of those electrolytes and some of that vitamin C into you. Gives you a little bit more kick. I know some people like coconut water, which wasn't easy to come by in a place like West Virginia, but about half of these tournaments have happened in big cities, so you can kind of get anything you need to get. And beyond that, chances are you've made some friends going to these tournaments. You might even have a team. Just rely on them, let them help out. If someone offers you a bit of food, take it. If someone's saying you're looking really awful, listen to them. Sometimes you don't even know what condition you're in, and they might be able to guide you back into a healthy state. Now, worst case scenario, and this happened to at least one player from a team I talked to, is you might have to pull out of the tournament altogether. There are scenarios where I definitely think you should do that. If you have the flu, don't go spread that to everyone. We've been really lucky where we haven't had flu or COVID outbreaks at these events, but it is designed where you're sitting across from someone and talking to them for an hour straight and then swapping to the next person. So just going off of your opponents, the people they encounter and encountering you, you're pretty much spreading the germs throughout the entire tournament. There are always a few players wearing masks at these things, and whether it's to prevent themselves from getting sick or because they're, feeling a little under the weather and they want to prevent you from getting sick, that is more normalized in our country now, and it's good to have some masks. I knew where my illness was coming from, so I knew I was good there. But hopefully you didn't need to pay that airfare and pay for the hotels and everything just to sit in your hotel feeling awful, which goes to all those preventative things we talked about before. I hope this helped out a little bit. If you have your own tips, please leave them in the comments because this is the first time for me and I'm sure there's a lot of other good advice. It was so good talking to everybody who has found this podcast helpful. We had one person in top 32 who talked to me later about how the episode on mentality did help them out, which was great because I just barely got that out before the Dark Tower happened. And with that, on to the next episode. In the next episode, which will be the final one for this Towers block, we're going to talk about variants and what to expect. Towers, a Metazoo podcast, was created by me, Ester Ellis. The cover art was made by Chandler Candela. Music by the Heatley Bros. More details in the description. Want to say hello? Follow the show on Instagram at Towers Podcast. Send me an email at towersgamepodcast@gmail.com and say hi in Metazoo's Discord servers. Many of the figures in Metazoo originate in indigenous lore, and I think it's important for me to acknowledge that I make this podcast on the traditional lands and home of the Tongva Nation. This game presents us with a rich opportunity to get in touch with the living cultures that surround us, and I hope you can take a moment to reflect on the history of the land you stand on and the figures in the cards you play.